Now let's have a closer look at the fact-finding mission that's arrived in South Sudan. We're joined live from our Johannesburg studios by Dr Malte Brosig, an international relations expert with the University of Witswatersrand. Welcome to Africa Live. Now, Dr Brosig, human rights abuses have already been committed against the civilian population, and if we go as far back as December. So would you say this UN fact-finding mission has come too late?
Thanks for having me tonight. Well, it's kind of nature of fact-finding missions that they are deployed after the fact. So, yes, well, they are a bit late, but certainly not too late. I think they are important for a number of reasons. Maybe the first one is, well, you need to have someone who is objectively investigating cases for any kind of reconciliation that's going to happen after the conflict, and then obviously it's also important for the United Nations because there is talk about should the UN be capable to more proactively protect civilians, and then of course these data are hugely important to find out who was doing what.
All right, Dr Brosig, if we look back at the violence that's been committed since the end of last year, we had a cessation at some point, and that has of course begun again. Do you think that more could have done in terms of the peace process to prevent what's happened the last 2 weeks from occurring?
Well, we know that the predictive powers of international organizations are not very far developed. So when the conflict broke out, it was very much at the surprise of the United Nations as well as other organizations. So, I mean, what we can say so far in terms of the peace talks is that, well, the international community is very much engaged, but the problem is really the warring parties that don't really feel the urge to, for instance, comply to ceasefire agreements. So the warring parties at the moment don't seem to be exhausted enough to be able to be forced into a ceasefire agreement and later peace deal.
So that if we haven't seen them being forced into that peace deal, then how seriously or how can we expect them to take these recommendations from the fact-finding mission, to take those recommendations seriously, both the warring parties and the international community?
Yeah, as I said, I'm not that optimistic at the moment. I mean, we have seen in the past that there was a ceasefire agreement and that has been broken rather quickly. So, and the fundamental conditions have not really changed. So as long as both sides think that they can win the war and that violence is a means for politics, you know, as long as this conviction is there, I'm rather negative. Well, the question for international organizations is, are there verification mechanisms? Are sanctions working? Are enforcement mechanisms working? If these mechanisms would be in place, then the outlook would be more positive.
Now, one of the other issues is that the African Union has called for the deadline for the peace deal to be reached. So would this effectively speed up the peace process? You have said you aren't optimistic, and what is your feeling regarding the end of that peace process?
Yes, well, the deadline is important in one way, but it can also be problematic in another. So first of all, it sends a strong signal from the African Union that the conflict and the peace talks cannot continue endlessly, and that's pretty important to draw a direct line to say, you know, you have to come to the negotiation table, and war is not a means for politics. On the other hand, it can be problematic because if you enforce a ceasefire agreement, for example, on warring parties that do not want to stop fighting, then very often, yes, you get a ceasefire agreement, but on the other side, it will be broken rather quickly. So this is the kind of dilemma situation we're in.
Right, Dr Malte Brosig, thank you very much for your time this evening. We're speaking there to Dr Malte Brosig, an international relations expert with the University of Witswatersrand.